Good morning and welcome to the Hibs Observer post-match debrief with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Patrick McPartlin to look back at St Mirren 2, Hibs 2 and Paisley, but more importantly, Hibs securing third place in the Scottish Premiership with a point down in Paisley. Aberdeen's defeat at home to Celtic, Dundee United losing to Rangers means Hibs now cannot be caught and they will officially finish third in the Scottish Premiership, a pretty remarkable achievement considering the dark depths of October, November, some of December. Very few people would have thought this possible, but most of those who did, I think, were inside that Hibs dressing room, and it shows you just what the rest of us know. It's a team that was written off, a manager that was written off in a lot of quarters as well, and they've somehow managed to turn it around. They went on this incredible run, and now they are getting the rewards for it, and they will be playing European football in some form next season. Just before we get started properly, though, a word for our sponsor. The Hibs Observer is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs, so start your search today. Patrick, just reactions to last night, to the season, to everything.
Yeah, I mean, a really funny game last night when you consider how it started and, the way that Hibs kind of shot out the blocks, and you just thought when they scored too early on and having one ruled out for offside, you just kind of thought this is, Hibs could kind of score however many they want tonight. And I think, when you've got that sort of situation where there's another game that can play a part, you can't be distracted. You just have to kind of focus on what you're doing. And I think, as well, like David Gray talked about this beforehand. He talked about, St Mirren being the only team that Hibs hadn't beat at least once in this, over the course of the season. And it's a man who likes his targets. And I think that would have been, a little added incentive, just saying it'd be nice to complete the set, a clean sweep of at least one win against every other team in the division. Obviously not to be, because the second half was sort of very, very different to the first half. I don't think too unexpected. We know what St Mirren are like at home. We know that, we know what they're capable of. We know they're a good team. They're well coached, well drilled. And I actually thought they were a little bit off it to begin with. So I think it was maybe a combination of a bit of a rocket at halftime from Stephen Robinson. I can't imagine he was particularly happy, and maybe a little bit of maybe complacency from Hibs, maybe a little bit of a feeling that 2-0 up away from home, they were kind of halfway there, and then you maybe start thinking you kind of put the brakes on a little bit. But in the end, mattered little. Hibs have finished third. They've got European football, and ultimately, it's got to go down as a good season, regardless of score lines and sort of like individual or minor targets with trying to beat every team in the league at least once. As you were saying in the intro there, just quite remarkable. I think back to that game at Dens Park when Hibs got beaten 4-1 by Dundee, had a man sent off. That was, that came just after, I think it was about the week after they showed signs of sort of almost recovery, kind of green shoots, if you like. The fight back against St Mirren at home didn't work out the way they wanted to. They did score late on, had the goal chopped off for offside, and the way they started at Dens, you just sort of thought this could be the start of the turnaround, and then to go from thinking there are positive signs here to thinking I'm not sure the players or Gray can come back from this. And then it's been talked to death, so we don't need to discuss it. But just that game against Aberdeen really turning things around. And I think when you look at it, I think Hibs have lost something like 4 games since then. I think it is, which is quite remarkable when you consider the start of the season, that just individual errors and whatever sort of luck there wasn't going in Hibs' way. Too many red cards and late goals conceded, that sort of thing. So it's, pretty remarkable. I think it's when you consider where they were at the start of December, even where they are now, where they finished, the job that David Gray's done. And I think we make a lot about the run that Hibs have been on. We make a lot about the players sort of stepping up. We make a lot about Martin Boyle on his sort of personal mission to hit 100 goals before the season's up. But I think it shouldn't be overlooked the fact that this is David Gray's first full season as a head coach in his own right, and dealt a sort of not the best hand in the domestic trophies. 2 trips to Celtic in both cup competitions. Regardless, I mean, I know with the League Cup, you could argue that had Hibs beaten Celtic Hearts, then they would have had to go to Celtic. But you only deal with what's in front of you. So I mean, obviously internally Easter Road, the targets at the start of the season are go deep in both cup competitions and finish as high up the league as possible. So 1 out of 2 ain't bad when you think how the season started and the fact that they had to go to Celtic twice in both cups. So yeah, I think real credit to David Gray, and he'll hate me saying that because he makes a point of saying it's about the players, and he's right. But at the same time, I don't think he should be shying away from taking a bit of credit for what is actually quite a remarkable achievement in his first season as manager in his own right, given what he's dealt with. Injuries to key signings in the summer. Luck going against you. It has been. And going away to Rangers and beating them at Ibrox, back-to-back wins against Hearts, beating Celtic at home. It's really been quite remarkable. And I think when we were doing these videos at the start of the year, it was always a bit doom and gloom. And you're sort of thinking, are we going to get another manager in the door? Like what's going to happen if it's another season like last, where it just kind of peters out towards the end, and there's little interest, and you think it's another season of underachieving, but. Fair play to the coaching staff and David Gray and the players, because it's actually ended up being one of the best seasons in a while, certainly since the sort of 2020-21 season when they last finished third. But even then, that was the COVID season. You didn't have that connection with the fans. You didn't have. I don't think you had the same level of results. Hibs are very good at grinding out kind of 1-0 wins in that year. But to do it with the fans, back in the stadiums this season, and to do it in the manner they have done, to sort of come from kind of dead last in the table to coming third, it's been quite I think it's been a roller coaster season. I know it's a cliche, but it really is. It really has been a roller coaster season, and great fun to write about and talk about as well.
Yeah, aye. It certainly made a really nice change from our own selfish point of view of. From the early part of the season, because I think I think everybody thinks journalism thrives on negativity and controversy and stuff, but it's not great fun when you're covering one team every week and the results are not good.
And the same thing's happening.
You're basically copying and pasting from the week before. So I think from our own selfish point of view, it's been a lot of fun, but obviously, the main thing is the achievement of the team, that you talk about the connection with the fans, like David Gray, you can see how reluctant he is to really take any sort of credit for it. For I mean, you see it last night. I mean, he literally had to be physically picked up and carried towards the supporters because he was doing his usual kind of lurking around at the back. And I think obviously now the attention turns towards European football, which is obviously a really hugely exciting prospect for all involved, especially Patrick. And
I'm just prepared. I just like to be organised.
It's obviously, you need to wait and see what happens in the Scottish Cup final to see exactly where Hibs are going to. Exactly where they're going to drop into in terms of competitions, in terms of qualifying rounds. But it's just that it's a hugely exciting prospect, and one that was, I know we keep going back to a few months ago, but one that was pretty unthinkable not that long ago.
Yeah, and I think you can even hang your hat on getting through the Scottish Cup and getting to the final. I mean, even that's it's a tall order, and I think. At one point this season you were looking at it and thinking top six would be an achievement from last season. It would be progress. Yeah. It would be, incremental progress, but it would progress nonetheless. And I think, the way last season panned out, and the results, the performances, just the whole shebang. It just felt that there was quite a bit of a sort of air of negativity hanging over the club, and. I think the kind of League Cup campaign probably brought a bit of positivity back. There's some good results in there. There's the Celtic Hearts debacle, which we won't touch on, but apart from that, there were some really good results. Hibs were playing some decent football, and we sort of thought, okay, yeah, this is, this could be good. And then the season starts, and one defeat, you think, okay, fair enough, that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then the longer it goes on, the more you think, this isn't good. And the longer it goes on after that, you just think, this is getting to be a problem. And I think it would have been so easy if any club's board in that situation would have been so easy just to pull the trigger and just say, we can't afford to give the head coach and his staff time and see if they can turn it around. But I think what's kind of struck me from what what the players have been saying, what the coaching staff have been saying, even what the sort of the club hierarchy have been saying as well, that it was maybe in modern football unorthodox to give David Gray time and to just say, Lord, we're going to support you. We trust that things are moving in the right direction. We can see from whether it's the data, whether it's what he's saying, to the players, what they're doing in training. There must have been something that they saw, whether it's that togetherness that Gray's talked about a lot. There must have been something that was enough of a sign to convince them. Actually, let's sort of stick here rather than twisting. And I know that the unbeaten run, it was never about how many games could we go unbeaten. It was always very much one game at a time. I think some of the more recent press conferences when Gray said it, there was almost a smirk on his face because he kind of, we knew it was coming. He knew it was coming. I'm not looking beyond the next game. That's all we're focused on. As soon as the final whistle goes, attention then turns to the next game. So it's, it seemed to be very much like take it a game at a time. And I think that approach seemed to serve the team well, seemed to serve the coaching staff well. And I think the longer the unbeaten run went on, I think that's when there must have been like privately thoughts that actually, given what Aberdeen were doing or not doing, given the way other teams were kind of on poor runs when, Hibs kind of timed theirs really well, then that's when you would have been looking at it thinking, actually, there's a chance we could do this. And internally, they must have been thinking this is an achievable target. But you don't say anything externally. It doesn't leave the dressing room. It doesn't leave HTC because you're setting yourself up for a fall, aren't you? And it's fine to have targets, but I mean, it's like a player coming out and saying, "I want to score 15 goals this season." At the start of the campaign, and they get 14, and then they feel like they failed. If you just have that wee target yourself at the back of your head, and then just keep sort of plugging away at that, then I think there's less pressure to get there. And I think I think David Gray would have been saying that. I think he would have been saying to some of those players, look, you've played in Europe before, you know how good it is. You know how special the sort of the European nights are, either at Easter Road or away from home. And also, I think it's the fact that if things do go Hibs' way, if Celtic do win the Scottish Cup, then that sort of guarantee of group phase football, which is another first for Hibs, and another kind of feather in David Gray's cap. Obviously, the financial boost from that is immense, but just sort of almost putting Hibs on a pedestal a wee bit, and then becomes easier to attract players. And it's, I think in the club's 150th anniversary year as well. It's a nice the way things have kind of panned out like that. So yeah, I think fully deserved, but I can imagine that it was it wasn't a kind of, they weren't saying in December, January, like, let's go for Europe. I think it's just, let's keep winning games, see where we can go. And as we know, Hibs just couldn't stop not winning or drawing games. And, I think it's gotten to a stage now where they're, they finished third, they're in Europe, but it's more, there's a bigger picture as well. It's the fact that you consider how things were this time last year, how flat they were, how kind of, disinterested fans were, I think, to come back and, even the start of this season, we saw the protests at some of the games, we heard what the fans were shouting at the board. Don't think there were elements of the support who maybe weren't convinced, by David Gray, weren't convinced by some of the players. I think there'll be a heck of a lot of people deleting tweets this morning. Found one yesterday, Nicky Cadden talking about when he was out injured watching the team and saying we've got a really good group here. and the replies under it
I remember
are
that.
quite something. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to be fair, like
stitching Nicky Cadden up by tweeting that. So I remember something you've stitched him up by, but he said it and he was right. So he's been vindicated in the end.
Vindication for Nicky Cadden. Not that we're keeping receipts here, but I mean, I just thought, that all joking aside, it's a sign of how far the team's come that, a player could say, oh no, I think we're good. And everyone else is saying, can we get a random drugs test for Mr. Cadden after the next game, things like that. Just because it just seemed like such a crazy thing to say. I think was it November the 1st he said that? So like understandable because there were some horror show results after that date, but yeah, there we go. Nicky trusted the process. That's exactly what happened. Not enough people trusted the process. Nicky was right all along.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there'll be a lot of excitement in that dressing room because the players who haven't played in Europe before will get a chance to experience it. Players who maybe didn't get a chance last time out, who will obviously want to get into that competition, and the financial boost as well. I mean that could be sort of quite important when it comes to like new contracts and things like that. As I said, attracting new players. So it's I think it's interesting because if Hibs had finished sort of like 4th or 5th, the way the season has started, you would have been saying, you know what, that's not bad. That's it's a decent turnaround. But to finish the season in 3rd, which is an all too rare occurrence for Hibs. I mean, I think you can probably count on one hand since the year 2000 the number of times Hibs have finished 3rd, which feels feels wrong for a club of Hibs stature and with the sort of ambition they've got. It's and I know it's a competitive league at times. I know you can look at the times that we're in the championship, but even so, you would have expected them to have a few more under their belt. So, David Gray started that. It's obviously a difficult task to follow next season, but I think it has been just quite a remarkable second half to the season, and long may it continue. And I think it's exciting to see where they can go. I think when you look at what David Gray's done with the team, how he's transformed individuals, brought some of them in from the cold, some of them have had to be sort of punted back to the bench, then brought back in. It's like we were saying, it's a remarkable achievement, and it's just really a credit to him, the coaching staff, and the players for not only managing to turn it around, but managing to turn it around in the manner they did.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's quite pleasing to see them get this reward at the end of the turnaround, because as good as it was, they would have probably have finished the season with maybe a wee tinge of disappointment if they hadn't managed to turn it into European football, or just for the fact it was the upturn in form was so good, but the fact that they've come from so far back, it's like when you kind of got into the contention for top 6 and then Europe, and then the margin for error throughout it all just remained really, really thin. There was, kind of really no room in there for slip-ups whatsoever. And I think when you go on, a record equaling 17-game unbeaten run, you do kind of expect form to sort of regress to the mean at some point. And I just wondered, maybe after the game away at Aberdeen, maybe is it going to regress a wee bit? And I don't think you could have been too critical if that had happened, because it was a kind of, as we say, it was was it something like 77 years that record stood for? It was a lot to ask, is what I'm trying to say, for Hibs to keep this up, to get to the position that they're in. And my concern was that they'd done so well, but they'd given themselves so much to do, that would it maybe just prove a wee bit too much in the end? But they've just continued to prove people wrong, and I think they really, really deserve, like Gray, the players, the staff, everybody involved. They really, really deserve this reward for what they've done over these last few months. And it would have been a shame if they hadn't quite got there. I don't think you could have called it a failure, considering where they came from, if they hadn't ended up in the European spots or in the 3rd place. But I think to do it in the way that they have and to sustain it in the way that they have it's really, really commendable. It
is, yeah. Just popped up Matty's comment there from long bangers account. Huge achievement from the team. Almost impossible to single out people for praise. A real collective effort, but it's right that Green's coaching team get the recognition for their part. Yeah, I mean that's kind of how I feel. That you don't, you can look at Martin Boyle and his goal contributions. You can look at Nicky Cadden with his sort of set piece delivery. You can look at the defence. You can look at the midfield. But it's just it's never really been about like one or two players. You think back to the 2020-21 season. I think part of the reason why Hibs got third that season is because Kevin Nisbet, Christian Deutsch, and Martin Boyle were all kind of in really good form pretty much throughout the campaign. I think all three of them hit double figures in terms of goals, and that obviously makes life a lot easier. Good defensive performance as well, but you can actually take out those three players and their contribution. But this time around, I mean, I think I was doing one of those things. You sometimes do it when you look at stats when you're bored for something to do, and just like the way the goals have been spread around. Like I think when Jack Iredale scored the winner in the derby, I think that was possibly every single defender had scored at least one competitive goal since the start of the season. And you think, well, that's chipping in. We've seen Dylan Levitt getting on the score sheet, Nectar Triantis getting in there, Joe Newell before his injury. All the forwards contributing as well. So it's that sort of like not really relying on one or two players. It is a collective effort. It is it's very much about the team rather than individuals. And I think that's been the big thing for me is that this, sometimes I think you look at teams and they sign players who have a good caliber, the statistics are good, and by rights they should be a good fit for the league, they should be a good fit for the team, but for whatever reason it just doesn't work out. And I think back to last summer when we looked at Nicky Cadden coming in and some of the comments, he's only here because of his brother. Jack Iredale coming in as well, and folk are sort of grumbling a wee bit like, who's this that we've signed on deadline day? What's he going to do? Backup left back. It's quite funny when you look back at it now. And even some sort of there were questions about Martin Boyle, whether he still had what it took. Granted, he'd been playing with an injury for the first part of the campaign, and I think a lot of players, even aside from the team getting questioned when they were sort of making these individual errors, when they were, not getting the results at the start of the season. Obviously, individuals and collectively there were questions asked then, but I think even after that, there's still been questions about some players, and they've kind of bounced back. You look at Lewis Miller, a good example of someone who's, I think really come onto the game this season. Rocky Bashiri's, kind of rise kind of speaks for itself, and it is sort of credit to Gray and his coaching staff for identifying like how to get the best out of each player, and not only how to get them to perform individually, but to get them performing collectively as well. And if anything, that's probably I think right that we kind of highlight that, right that Matty's highlighted it there, because I think it might get overlooked a little bit in the grand scheme of things, what with European football, third place, and some of the kind of big statement wins. But I think that's been quite impressive. When you think about the past few seasons and how many players have come in who haven't really done it, haven't really had an impact. I think you look at that whole team, and I don't think there's anyone you'd say, well, he didn't do much. And I think that's quite a tribute to Gray and his coaching staff for managing to get that out of the players and out of this team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a nice note to leave it on this morning. Thanks for joining us, folks. Hope you enjoyed the game last night. Hope you enjoyed the celebrations afterwards, and I'm sure you'll enjoy some celebrations over the weekend. And there is one game left to go this season at home to Rangers, Easter Road on Saturday. We'll be there to cover that. We'll be at the press conference tomorrow as well to get some further reaction to Wednesday night, and obviously to look ahead to that game as well. So thanks for joining us, folks. Thanks for joining us throughout the entire season. We'll see you again after the excuse me. See you again after the Rangers game for instant.
Emotional now.
What's that?
Is that you getting emotional coming to the end of the season?
No sentiment here, unfortunately. No, just thanks for joining us. No, obviously, thanks for all the support throughout the season, folks. Those of you who have subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the website. As I say, we've got one more game left to go. I'm sure it'll be an enjoyable one on Saturday, and we'll speak to you very, very soon for that. Cheers.
Cheers.